Hear ye, hear ye. These are the top 10 unusual fashion trends in history. Number 10, Crackos. Shoes have been through quite the evolution over time. If you think your typical dad sneakers look kind of silly nowadays, then you might want to feast your eyes on these pointy head scratchers. These shoes are known as Crackos, and their distinctive feature was the ridiculously long pointy toes that stuck out like a sore thumb. But for some reason, it seemed like these pointy ends were all the rage back in the day because the shoes were only getting bigger and more ridiculous all the time. Even knights were beginning to replicate the pointy shoes in their armor, as the Crackos are really taking the world by storm in the 14th and 15th century. The shoe was originally designed by Anne of Bohemia, who married King Richard II, and many believe this is how the trend started. Men and women were both wearing the oddly shaped shoes, but it was especially important for men to have longer points on their Crackos, as it was considered a status symbol. The shoe was eventually banned altogether in England and France in 1465, so thankfully this trend did not have to carry on any longer. Number 9, Tutor Ruffs. So you'll quickly notice that many fashion trends from classical eras had a bad habit of being extremely uncomfortable to wear for no reason at all. It seemed like everyone just wanted to make a statement and didn't care if their clothing negatively affected their ability to breathe. Case in point, the Tudor ruffs that were incredibly popular in the Elizabethan era of England. Ruffs were essentially giant puffy collars that were fitted around a person's neck and gave them a very noble look. Only the wealthiest citizens could afford Tudor ruffs, which made them an obvious status symbol back in the day. However, most of the time they were fitted so tightly to a person's neck that it would actually make it difficult to breathe and would more often than not deform a person's neck. On top of that, they were usually so big that they would resemble a frilled lizard that puffs out its neck as a mating tactic. So while ruffs probably did attract other rich folk back in the day, they definitely weren't the most elegant looking things in the world. Number 8, toxic dresses. Yes, you heard that right. When people were really starting to experiment with dyes and colored clothing, some of them eventually went overboard and created a new fashion trend that used toxic dyes in their clothing. The dye color in question was a unique type of green that resembled an emerald and instantly made anyone stand out. Women were thoroughly enjoying dyeing their dresses in this striking shade of green, but they quickly discovered that it had some very negative side effects. It turns out the eye-catching color was created by mixing copper with arsenic trioxide, and this mixture created an extremely toxic dye. Over time, people who were wearing the green dresses eventually started to experience terrible rashes and burn marks, as well as hair loss in more serious cases. The dye was even causing some people to lose their lives due to their ongoing health issues, and thankfully this led to the development of synthetic dyes. But who knows, if they had kept wearing the green dresses, they might have ended up turning into the Incredible Hulk. Number 7, Chopins. Now I can only imagine that walking in high heels is not an easy task, but after looking at Chopins, you would probably think that modern day heels aren't so bad. Chopins were basically the original platform shoe, and of course being the very first of anything, you are almost always going to look ridiculous. These Chopins came in many different shapes and sizes, but the most popular pairs often resembled wooden sandals that have been stuck to large pedestals. The main goal of the platform shoe was to obviously give their owners more height, but they would often be covered up by long pants or dresses. It seems like even people back then agreed that these shoes were absolutely ridiculous looking, but they were very clear that they wanted to be taller. There was also another weird status aspect involved with Chopins. Some people believe that the higher the shoe, the higher the person's social class was. So it seems like if you wanted to get ahead in life hundreds of years ago, you just had to find a nice piece of wood and carve yourself some platform shoes. Number 6, corsets. Here's another strange fashion trend that made it incredibly difficult to breathe. While Tudor ruffs put a ton of unnecessary strain on a person's neck, corsets were a deadly piece of clothing that were worn around a woman's midsection. They were essentially clamps that would be worn over a dress that constrained a woman's midsection and gave her more of an hourglass figure. Now obviously, in order for it to have a real effect, the corset had to be tied incredibly tight, meaning it would squeeze the woman very hard and would cause a ton of unnecessary pain. But the scariest part is that it would often have permanent permanent effects on a woman's body if they were worn frequently. The women would generally tie them so tight and would wear them so often, it would actually cause their body to change shape. Now, some women might have liked the sound of this back in the day, but the corsets could also cause serious strain on internal organs that would lead to a multitude of issues over time. Number 5. Bombasting. So while items like the corset made a person appear smaller than they actually were, bombasting was the exact opposite. Bombasting was a term that was used to describe men and women who would purposefully stuff their sleeves with padding to make it seem like they had incredibly large arms. This was once again seen as another status symbol in the Elizabethan era, as the padded clothing made nobles stand out amongst the crowds. And while sleeves were the most popular choice when it came to bombasting, some men would also use padding around their midsection. While that might sound a bit strange, a full belly was seen as yet another status symbol because it showed that you had a lot of money to spend on food. Peasants were often extremely skinny and malnourished, so it wasn't uncommon for royals and nobles to purposefully grow a belly to show off all the money they had to blow on food. But for those who didn't want to do that, you could always go the bombasting route and pretend that you had the royal gut that many desired. Number 4. Hobble skirts. So it definitely seems like there was a weird desire for clothing that made everyday tasks much harder. But while items like the Crackos shoes weren't intentionally created with the desire to make walking harder, that was actually the real goal of hobble skirts. They were created in the early 1900s by French fashion designer Paul Poiret, who came up with an odd styling choice that had a negative effect on a woman's mobility. Poiret designed a hem in the dress that actually hobbled any woman who wore it and made it harder for them to walk. The hem would only allow a woman to stretch her legs a short distance, which in the words of Poiret, freed the chest to be more active. Many women actually liked this idea because they saw it as an aesthetic piece that gave them a nice figure, but not everyone was on board. The skirts were often referred to as speed limit skirts because of how hard it was to walk in them, and needless to say, they did not last very long in the fashion world. Number 3. Black teeth. As it turns out, you didn't need clothing to follow every strange fashion trend from classical eras. And while dirty and rotting teeth are considered pretty unhygienic and disgusting features these days, they were once regarded as a sign of wealth. This all started thanks to Queen Elizabeth I's love for sugar and candy. Back in the day, sugar was extremely expensive and hard to come by, so only the wealthiest citizens and royals could afford sweet treats. Queen Elizabeth is one of the few people who could afford to eat candy every day, but this unfortunately meant that her teeth suffered quite a bit. Elizabeth was known to have some terrible teeth, but some people actually consider this to be a very good thing. Because everyone wanted to feel like royalty back in the day, some people came up with the bizarre idea to dye their teeth black to make it look like they were eating lots of sugar. Now, if you visited your dentist with black teeth in this day and age, you'd probably be prepping yourself for some deadly root canals. But as it turns out, you would have been considered quite the wealthy tutor back in the day with your terrible dental hygiene. Number 2. Crinolines. Alright, the corset and the hobble skirt were designed to make women look smaller, but now we're seeing more of people who want to be the size of a dump truck. Crinolines were essentially wired frames that were usually made out of steel and would be worn under a woman's dress. While the top of these undergarments would be tightly fitted to the woman's waist, they would gradually grow in size towards the bottom. This meant that when a dress was worn over top of it, it would appear to be absolutely enormous. It seems like the most illogical thing a woman could wear, but size was all that mattered to some people. If you were wearing one of these under your dress, there is no doubt you would be the talk of the party. However, it did cause quite a few mobility problems. For example, you could only fit through super wide doors, and sitting down proved to be quite a difficult task. But as long as you were attracting everyone's attention and were asserting your status, that's all that mattered at the end of the day. And number 1, macaroni. Thankfully, people did not cover themselves in actual macaroni back in medieval times, but even that might have been a little less weird than this bizarre fashion trend. The macaroni fashion trend basically meant finding the biggest, most extravagant wig possible and fitting it with a tiny hat or feather on top. In addition to the ridiculous looking wigs, macaroni trendsetters would also wear fancy buckled shoes and brightly colored stockings. Apparently, the men who joined in on the macaroni fashion trend even created their own mini language, which made the whole thing even more exclusive and slightly more ridiculous. And even during a time when people were buying clothes that purposefully made it harder to walk and intentionally making themselves look huge, macaroni was still laughed at by anyone who did not participate in it. While the high and mighty macaroni men were spending spending hours finding the perfect giant wigs to wear, the rest of the nation was laughing at their terrible sense of fashion and gibberish language. And that does it for a look at the top 10 unusual fashion trends in history. Let us know which one you thought was the weirdest of the bunch. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more videos.